Good morning. This is week 9 of the Cultural Geography of the United Kingdom. We have covered all the territories and the administrative divisions of the territories. I hope you managed to do the midterm quiz with the maps, and it wasn't very difficult. So the remaining part of the semester will talk about various aspects of culture, of places connected with the national heritage, with the famous people, with the regional specialties, and I'd like to start with the World Heritage UNESCO sites in the United Kingdom. As you can see on the map here, there are quite a few of them, and even more if we count overseas territories. We'll talk about them a little bit today. There will be a separate class about the overseas territories as well, but today only about the UNESCO World Heritage sites. They are all fairly well known, and you may also find all kinds of opinion polls and TV programs in which the British people are asked about their favorite landmarks, the national treasures as they are sometimes called. I found quite recently a program like that called Britain's Greatest National Treasures. Apparently this was a program based on a very large opinion poll held by the BBC, and I will not spill the beans, but most of the sites here on the UNESCO World Heritage list were also mentioned in those greatest national treasures of Britain. Actually, there were more sites in the national treasures list because this was like the 20 most popular sites, and you may look up the film, or we may talk about it during the live meeting. So let's look at the map. There are some places which are chosen because of their cultural significance, some of them which are chosen because of the outstanding natural beauty, and quite a few which combine both the natural beauty, the unique ecology of the place, and also the cultural legacy of the place. So let's start with the sites located in and very near London. So starting with the oldest and finishing with the newest. The first one is the Tower of London, one of the first World Heritage sites in Britain. So as you can see here, the Tower of London, which as you hopefully know by now, is not only a very important tourist attraction, but it now serves as the treasury for the regalia of the Queen, for the royal jewels, but in its long history, it was built just after the Norman conquest. It served many different functions. Originally, this was the royal residence in London, or very near central London. Then it was a very famous prison for aristocratic prisoners. So you might recall some famous cases from history, like the beheading of Queen Anne Boleyn, for example, or the shortest serving Queen, Jane Grey. So they were held in the Tower of London. I think the last people held in prison in the Tower of London were the infamous Cray twins who were the criminals. They were actually twin brothers in the 60s, I think, 1960s. Now it's a museum and a very popular place for tourism. We have the image of a beefeater, so the guardian of the tower, very traditional military unit. There are all kinds of legends involving the ravens that live in the Tower of London and are cared for by the beefeaters. There is a story that the legends must be kept there because if the ravens leave the tower, the British kingdom, well, England will fall. So that's the first UNESCO site for you. The second one is a joint site. The most important and most well-known sites are Westminster Abbey and the Palace of Westminster, but there is also another old Gothic church in the vicinity called St. Margaret's Church, and they together hold the World Heritage status. Westminster Abbey is one of the surviving Gothic cathedrals in Britain. This was the place of coronation of various monarchs of England and then of Great Britain. It is also the place of royal burial, one of the places of royal burial, and the place where famous and distinguished people are buried. For example, there is a special place in the Abbey called the Poets' Corner, where you have either the tombs or the commemorative plaques devoted to the greatest literary heroes of Britain, such as, for example, William Shakespeare. The Palace of Westminster, as you hopefully remember from our episode on London, is another name for the Houses of Parliament, so a very recognizable building, but in fact rebuilt, completely reconstructed in the 19th century after a disastrous fire in the early 1830s. And St. Margaret's Church is a well-preserved, surviving Gothic church in the vicinity of Westminster. So we have mostly, let's say, medieval Gothic style, with the Palace of Westminster representing the Victorian neo-Gothic style. But it's so recognizable, the clock tower and the Big Ben, and like everybody knows it, so of course it's there. Next place in London, on the outskirts of London originally, is the area called as Maritime Greenwich, and it includes mostly the monuments from Stuart times, so from the 17th century. After the death of Queen Elizabeth I, the Stuart dynasty from Scotland was inherited the throne of England, and here we have some of the realizations that they commissioned. The two images at the bottom of the slide show the oldest monument in Maritime Greenwich, which is called the Queen's House. It was built as a hunting lodge for Queen Anne, the wife of the first of the Stuarts on the English throne, James I. The other image shows the Royal Observatory. So you probably all heard about Greenwich Mean Time and the zero meridian, which is also measured from this particular building. It is on the top of a hill, not very big but quite interesting, with some historical astronomical and scientific equipment inside, and of course there is the zero meridian line in the courtyard, so everybody's taking pictures there. So that's another part of the UNESCO site here. The biggest one, however, is on the photograph above, and this is the Royal Naval College and the Royal Naval Hospital, built for the younger stewards after the restoration, after the Civil War. This was a naval college. This was also a hospital, which in the 17th century didn't really mean a place of healing, a place of medicine, but rather a kind of shelter, a kind of retirement home for naval veterans. If you ever go to Greenwich, please visit this place, go inside. They have a wonderfully decorated grand hall, which is called the Painted Hall, which has very interesting pictorial decoration, basically glorifying the Stuart dynasty and also the first king from the Hanoverian line, George the First, in the early 18th century. But as a whole, it's not everything. You can find lots of interesting things. There is a Royal Naval Museum. There is a preserved 19th century ship, a tea merchant ship called Cutty Sark. So it's a wonderful day to spend in Greenwich, and these three monuments constitute together the UNESCO site. Another place, the last place near London, is the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, with Kew Palace, which was a family home of sorts for the family of King George III and his many children. He had 15 children with his queen. They were mostly raised in this rather modest looking palace, now on the grounds of the Royal Botanic Gardens. This is a wonderful place, again, with those spectacular Victorian glass houses. So that's again a lovely place to visit, especially on in nice weather when all the plants are in bloom. There is a kind of treetops walk, which is quite a new thing. There are some small buildings like a Chinese pagoda and a little Japanese house, and then again there is a small building housing a wonderful collection of Victorian paintings, botanical paintings, mainly made by a very interesting, intrepid Victorian artist and adventurer called Marianne North. She was one of the great women of the Victorian period. So here we have those four places in Greater London. Then we move to other UNESCO sites situated in England. So hopefully you now know the location of the counties. So I will give you the counties if you still have any problems with locating these sites. So from the oldest to the newest. The oldest one is definitely Stonehenge. Again, this is not the UNESCO status given for one place only, so the famous standing stones of Stonehenge, but also Avebury and nearby associated sites. There are if I remember correctly, more than 10 different prehistoric Neolithic sites, of which, of course, Stonehenge is the most well-known and the most spectacular. But for example, Avebury Stone Circle, which you can see on the photograph near it. This is this giant stone circle. The stones itself are not that big, but the circumference of the circle is absolutely huge. There is actually an entire village fitted inside Avebury Stone Circle. There are some avenues of standing stones. There are some prehistoric tombs like Silbury Hill. Here we have one of those tombs here, and together again one of the earliest places to get UNESCO status in England, and definitely one of the oldest, although not the oldest, monuments in the British Isles. The next one is in the north of England. It's called the Frontiers of the Roman Empire, and it includes 2 lines of Roman fortifications, so Hadrian's Wall and Antonine Wall. Antonine Wall is less spectacular. It's basically an earth wall. But Hadrian's Wall is fairly well preserved and quite spectacular and very beautiful. There are also forts and other military structures remaining from the Roman times. Some of them quite well preserved. A lot of archaeological material was taken from there, including some letters, for example, from the soldiers and people employed in one of those sites called Vindolanda to their friends, relatives, business partners, and other people. So this is again a kind of very long site comprising several different places. Next one has Roman heritage, but also later monuments, and this is the city of Bath in Somerset, famous for the mineral baths, known even before the Romans, but very highly praised and used extensively by the Romans. So if you ever go there, it's a beautiful city, relatively near Wiltshire and Stonehenge. You can visit the well-preserved ruins of the Roman baths, so the healing temple that was built in this place by the Romans, basically recycling or developing the already existing Celtic healing temple. The next, let's say, period of greatness for the city of Bath was in the 18th century, when it became a very fashionable spa town for the aristocracy and generally the rich people who visited the baths for, let's say, health reasons. And also spend time socializing, and from this period we have a lot of wonderful architecture, like the Royal Crescent here, a very spectacular residential area, which is basically a row of houses. Which, especially from the side of the square, look like a grand, spectacular palace. There are some other places from this period. another 18th century residential development called the Circus, which is a kind of round row of houses around a circular square. And here we also have one of the museums devoted to Jane Austen. That's why we have those ladies dressed up in Regency costumes, very characteristic Regency dresses with high waistlines, because Jane Austen spent a few years living in Bath with her family, and now of course the city is very proud of her, and also some of her novels are at least partially set in the city of Bath. So you can have Jane Austen walks, and you can visit Jane Austen Museum, and even wear a dress like that yourself. There are some bugs here. If you wish to try on a Regency dress or a bonnet. So here we have the city of Bath. The next monument is again a small group of monuments from the medieval period. The most impressive of these is Canterbury Cathedral, but there are also other ecclesiastical buildings, other churches, St. Augustine's Abbey and St. Martin's Church. They are all situated in the county of Kent. Of course, Canterbury Cathedral was one of the principal sites of pilgrimage in the medieval period. You are probably all familiar with Canterbury Tales, telling a story of a group of pilgrims going to Canterbury to visit the burial site of one of the important British saints, Saint Thomas Becket. Originally, this was the first church or the first cathedral established by Saint Augustine. The priest, the bishop, sent from Rome to preach to the Anglo-Saxons, but of course after the tragic murder of Thomas Becket by the knights of King Henry II, this became an even more popular site of pilgrimage. But this is probably the places, one of the places with the oldest Christian monuments. So if we disregard some influence of Christianity in the late Roman period, this is really when Christianity was reintroduced to the British Isles by St. Augustine, who preached to the Anglo-Saxons, and this is how it came from, of course, continental Europe. So this is no surprise that these monuments are set in the county of Kent. We have one more medieval monument, medieval cathedral and a castle in England, in the north again. So in County Durham we have the castle and cathedral both in the city of Durham. Beautiful medieval city with a lovely old town situated on a high hill over a valley with a river. One of the best preserved cathedrals, and also a lovely castle situated right next to it, and it now houses a university, Durham University. If you want more, there is a wonderful mini-series called Britain's Cathedrals by Tony Robinson. He talks about Canterbury, he talks about Durham, he talks about some more places if you wish. So other wonderful cathedrals which are not unfortunately UNESCO sites, such as the cathedral in Salisbury or in York, or a completely modern 20th century cathedral in Liverpool. But if you want to know more, Tony Robinson and the documentary about the most beautiful English cathedrals. Next, we move to the late 17th century, the last of the Stuarts, Queen Anne, and the great palace she ordered as a present for her great military commander, the Duke of Marlborough, after his very successful military campaign in France. It's in Oxfordshire. It's called Blenheim Palace. It's a huge building. This is just a part of it, really. On the photographs, it's absolutely huge. If you want to see the entire thing, I suggest you Google it and perhaps also look at the different perspectives. So the Duke of Marlborough, the family name of the Dukes of Marlborough was Churchill, and he was indeed the ancestor of Winston Churchill, who was even born in Blenheim Palace. The wife of the Duke of Marlborough was the closest friend, companion, confidant, and some even say a lesbian lover of Queen Anne. So if you remember the story from the film The Favourite, this is the Favourite. This is the old Favourite that was basically uprooted from her place of influence at the royal court by her younger and more cunning relative. So here we have Blenheim Palace from the late Stuart period, a wonderful Baroque style palace with extensive gardens and a lot of historical significance. And we continue in a moment.